Okay, you can take your seats. We're going to get started. All right, in for an exciting night. I have a couple of announcements first. The first one is to make sure that everybody has seen the naturalization ceremony. This is the last call. If you are short on service hours, this is a way to get a few extra service hours. What you're going to do is you're going to come a little bit early. You're going to get to know one of the 50 people who is going to become a citizen in front of your very eyes. So this is where immigration and national identity come together. I am so excited about this event on the 19th. If you're going to be one of the ambassadors, you'll come a little bit early. You'll get to know one of the families, and then you'll introduce them. Introducing simply means you're going to say their name and where they're from. It's going to be 2 seconds, and then you'll go sit down. So the introducing itself is not a big deal if that was holding you back. But we still have a few more people. I need it to be 50 people. I need 50 people, so if I don't get volunteers, I'm going to start dragging in people. So if you haven't already and you're interested, please sign up. House points? Just the standings are the same, or? Yeah, okay, so the house points standings are the same. Has not been a lot of movement, so make sure that you're getting out there and getting those house points. So I am so excited about tonight. This is an intercollegiate and intercolloquium experience. This is basically University of Arizona and Model US takeover of NIM. So you get to experience some of the best of University of Arizona and also some of the other experiences that students in some other colloquium sections have had. So I'm very excited about this. So I'm going to introduce Will Hewitt, who is, he holds a faculty fellowship at the Hicks Honors College. He is this year's winner of the Interdisciplinary Award for Interdisciplinary Innovation. He's also, unsurprisingly, been a recipient of UNF's Outstanding Undergraduate Teaching Award. He publishes in politics, poetry, fiction, philosophy, as well as translation, and his work has appeared in Global Politics Magazine, North American Review, the American Journal of Poetry, and the Oxford Anthology of Translation, among others. When not working on his literary, historical, or theatrical courses, he is usually trying to talk to his students, his friends, his toddler, or perhaps his dog, about the latest analysis, data, and reporting on the political campaign. So please join me in welcoming Will Hewitt.
Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? Nobody's nervous about the election, right? Well, I'm really happy for our event tonight that we have something productive to do instead of just wait for returns to come in, which won't be in for a little while anyway. And I'm really proud to announce all of these people that are our wonderful panel on stage. I love politics so much. My first real job was in Washington, D.C., and my second job was in Austin, Texas, working in the capitals in those respective cities. And I was as important as a staple in one of them and as important as a stapler in the other one. But it was a fun experience and something that showed me that there's so much creativity and innovation that happens in the world of politics that we frequently don't appreciate because we get caught up in so many other things. And getting the different perspectives to kind of come alive when we're thinking about our political selves is something that tonight's event is all about. And I want to introduce each one of the people that's going to be on stage and then our wonderful collaborator from the University of Arizona, Ted McCluth, who I've had the pleasure to know for many years, and Dr. John White, who's going to moderate tonight from our own College of Education. But before any of that, let me just kind of give you a quick overview of what's happening with that note card that you were given. Because tonight's event is meant to be interactive. Usually in these sorts of talks, you hear from some expert, you hear from somebody who has something that they want to tell you about how the world is. And so much of what the discourse series in politics is about, and what we hope to bring to this, is about more of a sharing of perspectives. And in that, we're going to hear not necessarily a lecture, but we're going to hear from student voices to basically hear what does Gen Z think of elections, education, identity, the intersection of those different fields, and how does that shape your view on the political future of this country and its effect on the world. So on that card, I want you each to think over the next half hour or so about something that you dread about our political future, and then something that gives you hope. One of those couple of things, okay? You don't have to write something right now, but just keep that in mind. And then on the flip side of the note card, I want you to think about how that might lead you to ask a question to one of the people up on stage tonight. And then you can have more of a back and forth. This is about sharing the perspectives of our student panel, but also about hearing from you about what's meaningful about our political future that we share collectively. So, having said all that, I'd like to first introduce the students from the University of Arizona. Ananya Singhvi, if you could wave. She's a marketing and economics major at the University of Arizona and an Eller Rising Star in marketing. And with leadership roles in student organizations like the Women in Economics Club and the South Asian Student Association, she has great interest in academic freedom and campus speech. And as a participant in the Regents Cup, Ananya offers a nuanced perspective on the legal and cultural dynamics of campus expression. And we also have Andrew Pomgratz, is a PPEL and economics major at the University of Arizona, and that's politics, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe. Politics, philosophy, economics, and law. And he has minors in international business and Spanish. And as a project analyst with the student engagement team in the WA Frankie Honors College and a clerk for the U.S. Attorney's Office, he's also co-organized Hack Arizona and serves as a debater for the Regents Cup and panelist for the UA Discourse Series. And then on the UNF front, we have Ali Jimenez, who grew up all over the East Coast, including Canada, at one time, and was majoring in child psychology with double minors in creative writing and film. They enjoy falling off of their skateboard and watching movies with friends. We have David Rodebaum, who grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, in the metro area there, and is majoring in international business and finance, and was hiking with his family and friends. We have Eliza Maisel, who grew up in Gulf Breeze, Florida, but as a military kid spent time in Michigan and Georgia as well. And she's majoring in biology with a concentration in coastal environmental science and hopes to pursue a career in conservation. And she enjoys being outside and exercising. And you have Valentina Bonilla, who grew up in Venezuela but moved to Colombia due to the turbulent political climate and majors in physics and hopes to be a researcher in the future. She likes to dance, play with her putt Kobe, and get involved in student organizations in her free time. Would y'all give them a round of applause? So we have a variety of just different regional, interdisciplinary, different majors, different career paths, all up on stage here to represent the diversity that is Gen Z. And then we have our guest moderator, Dr. John White from the College of Education. Dr. White is a professor in the College of Education. He's currently the senior faculty fellow for the provost at UNF. Recently, he's been both the president of UNF's Faculty Association, as well as its faculty union, which is where I first got to know him, John. He's volunteered on half a dozen congressional and presidential campaigns for decades, and his research in the field of education focuses on school reform, sociolinguistics, and student success. And more specifically, is currently geared around curriculum, power, and ideology in the UK and US. And then the last intro that I have here for you is my friend, Professor Ted McCluth, who's a principal lecturer at the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Arizona. His work has appeared in esteemed journals such as the Kenyon Review, Diagram, and Bellevue. And he's been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of the Net Award. And for the last several years, he's directed the UA Discourse Series, coordinating this series crisscrossing the country to put students in dialogue with others, sharing their perspectives on socio-political topics that mean the most to college students. And I've been fortunate to know him for over a decade, and I'm always excited to see what he's going to build next. So with that, let me turn it over to Ted LaProof.
Thanks, Will. I was going to stand behind the podium, but I'm looking at the live stream and realizing I'm way too short for the podium, for the live stream to see me. So just very quickly, I don't want to kind of overwhelm everybody with introductions, and I do want to get to the panel. But I did just want to introduce the UA debates, the UA discourse series, and what we do. It's probably relevant to point out that the idea for the UA discourse series began the day after the 2016 election. I teach debate in my courses, and everyone was feeling a little bit sort of stressed out from the 2016 election, and I remember going into my class the next day, watching my students prepare the debate that they had done, and I watched them argue with each other, and I went, why are these people so much better at doing this than the candidates who we have been watching and the people in the media who have been trying to sort of analyze all of this stuff? And I realized that my favorite people, as is always the case, to interact with and to hear from are my students, the college students, who are always incredibly thoughtful and have great stuff to say. So that's why we do this. We go around to different colleges across the country to try to get these panels together, to elevate student voices, hear what it is that y'all have to think. And of course, tonight is election night. You're probably going to be checking your phones every now and then to watch the election returns come in. So thank you for being here at a time when I'm sure that you probably have other things that are on your mind, but hopefully we'll be talking about exactly what's on your mind. So very quickly, I just want to go through the run of show this evening. So we're going to hear from our student panelists, moderated by John. Thank you, John, for doing this. For about half an hour, we're going to sort of hear what it is that our student panelists who have been talking about this stuff with us week by week in preparation for tonight, we're going to hear what they have to say on the issue of what are the issues that concern college students the most when it comes to the election, what are the issues that get you out to vote, what are the issues that sort of make you feel a little bit despairing and maybe keep you from deciding to vote. We're going to hear from them for about half an hour. After that, we're going to have a very brief 5-minute intermission, although it's not really an intermission because all of you hopefully will be working with your groups to be able to figure out whether the questions that are on your note cards are also questions that are shared by everybody else. And if those questions are ones that you feel as though you'd like to share, right after that intermission, we're going to have a Q&A where you can ask those questions of our panelists, hear what they have to say. Hopefully your questions are actual questions. I always like to remind audiences, questions are things that end in a question mark. So make sure that you have something to ask our panelists. And we'll take about a half an hour worth of Q&A after that. And then you are free to come up and bombard our panelists afterwards with whatever questions that you have. I think there's other stuff in preparation for your classes and things like that. But that is going to be the whole entire night. So that said, I don't want to take any more time away from this excellent panel. So John, go ahead and take it away. Let's give one last round of applause for our panelists.
Good evening, everybody. Again, my name is John. I don't stand for formality, so I told everyone they can just call me John. The first question here is based on, I'm going to give some context. The first question is really asking what you, as college students, Gen Z, think are the main ideas of the election, or what do you think is the headline of this election? And the preface for that is, I'm 57 years old, and I get my news and information from certain sources. That's often different for different people, different generations, and different ethnicity, backgrounds, etc. So the question is, what do you think are going to be the major headlines of this election, and ideally what people will be talking about years from now? What's going to last?
So speaking from a Gen Z perspective, I think that this election is going to be remembered as the election of a lifetime because just so much feels at stake. Gen Z is a younger generation, and for many of us, this is the first election that we're voting in. So specifically for Gen Z, it feels like their very identities are on the right to be themselves into the line. Not to get too much into the policies of either candidate, just the LGBT community, women, and a lot of minorities across the Gen Z population have their rights threatened by the outcome of this election, which is why I feel there's so much at stake and it's going to be remembered like that.
Yeah, I think when you talk about elections, everything looks like really divided. But I feel like as students and me personally, I feel like we all want simple things, and that is having equal voices, having representation, having a fair living cost, and affordable education. So I feel like even though it feels very divisive, I think it's like very simple things that we all care about. And also one thing that the history will remember for me would be representation, and I feel this is the time where women can represent, and it would be a history if we get a chance.
So almost every presidential election, one side or both sides pit each other as the enemy, and in this case, the enemy of democracy, the enemy of the future of this country. What do you think separates this election? Like you mentioned, it's the critical election. What do you think separates this election from the one 4 years ago, or the one 8 years ago, or 12 years ago when you were all toddlers? I mean, what makes it so critical compared to past elections?
So I think that the main difference here is uniquely unlike any other election in the past. Both sides believe that there's an existential crisis, that they need to go out and hit the polls to safeguard democracy, whether they're right or wrong. That there's genuine fear that your way of life is going to be forever changed by this election. And I think that that's a unique challenge again that we've never had before in the country.
I also think that the stakes are just a lot higher with the results themselves this election, because following the wake of January 6th, we legitimately don't know what the response will be if one party or the other wins. Like, even though there is kind of that doomsday scenario, like it could lead to actual violence this election.
I'll say one specific difference to get into specific policy would be the overturn of Roe v. Wade. This election specifically is going to have consequences due to that. That in the past, there were ideals on either side of the argument, but there was no real concrete way to change the actual policies within the federal government and within states. And now that we see that and we talk about a federal abortion ban or making abortion legal on a federal level again, that is a big difference that has just never come up in any election. And I think for the majority of America, either way, it is a huge issue and something, especially that Gen Z is interested in and cares about.
Or maybe it is not as important, maybe all elections were equally important, and we are feeling the crisis because this is the first time we are voting, and maybe Gen Z is being targeted like that. And so maybe choosing a leader has always been important, and every election is marketed as the most important election because they're trying to target the new voters.
I would say that every election is kind of portrayed that way or framed that way, but the rhetoric has gone up and up and up to the point where we haven't seen it before. And of course, it's always cumulative, so we don't know what's going to happen 4 years from now, but I think the rhetoric has gotten so excessively fueled and charged that it feels different now than it did before. What are you going to say?
I wanted to follow up what Eliza was saying because I think it adds up to the feeling that your life is at risk, because at least for half of the population, that's the case. Because we have heard from states which have very strict laws against abortion that there have been countless deaths that could have been avoided but ended up happening because of women not being able to receive the medical care that they needed on time due to these laws. So at least for women, the stance that the administration that gets elected today defines whether or not they will be able to get life-saving treatment. So I think that adds a lot to the stakes of this election.
A related question is, it might be somewhat related, where is it that your generation is getting their information? In other words, I told this story before. In my generation, there were 3 major networks, if you didn't include PBS, and each major network had nightly news. And the nightly news was carried on all the networks. The newspapers had the news. But in each organization, there was an editor. And the editor was the gatekeeper of truth in many ways. In other words, you came to if you're a journalist and you came to me and I was the editor, I'd want you to make sure you backed up all your sources, or back up your information from multiple sources, etc. We know the news landscape is changing. Where is it that young people today get their information? And when you get their information, what are you doing to specifically weigh the possible truths and myths in that information?
I think it's an excellent question, John, and it's really reflective of the fact that we receive so much information on so many different topics almost daily. I feel like it's so hard sometimes just to parse through everything because it feels like every 10 minutes something new is happening, and if you're not keeping up with the wave, then it's, you're missing out. I personally get my news from more traditional sources. I'm more of kind of a classic news junkie. I've got subscriptions to the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Washington Post through my student status at the University of Arizona. And I would think maybe some of my colleagues here too probably have similar subscriptions due to their student status. But I don't know if that's reflective of other Gen Z, and I'd like to hear from my fellow panelists on that.
I learned that Trump got shot on Twitter. I do think that the thing about social media is it's so attractive as a news source because it's instant, you're already there, all your friends can talk about it, but intentionally seeking after news sources instead of kind of passively consuming it is something that I think our generation really needs to prioritize.
I think I get my news from social media, but even on social media, there are sources that can be reliable. I follow Wall Street Journal, Economic Times, and I feel like that helps me consume reliable information, even though it's coming from social media, because that's where I spend most of my time. But that helps me spend my time wisely too.
I'm not gonna lie, I also get most of my news from social media. Preparing for this panel, I definitely went into more reliable sources to say so, like the New York Times, podcasts, etc. I even downloaded, some of you may have heard about this, but there's this website called Ground News which shows you different articles from both sides of the political spectrum so that you can check your sources and get out of your bubble, because when you're only looking at your social media, then your algorithm will automatically give you content that aligns with your perspective, so you can get trapped in this bubble thinking, oh, everyone thinks the same as I do. So that's how I really try to get out of that bias. But as Andy was saying, I don't think this is representative of Gen Z, and most of us, like me before preparing for this panel, only get our sources from social media. And it's also what's the most impactful, because even though there may be some sources that will give you the correct information, that won't catch your attention the way some spectacular headline will do. And that's usually what sticks and what I think has been shaping Gen Z political views for these elections.
I think that's a great point. It sounds like an excellent website. I think the real danger is having, like what you said, the algorithms that determine kind of your echo chamber. But that's kind of a glass echo chamber where you're not really, you can think that you're consuming sources from multiple sides. So you're like, oh, it's not just one website that I confirm this, but multiple. And that I have a really well-informed opinion from multiple different sources, but that could just be not the case. So having a diverse set of opinions where you really reach outside the box and kind of looking at all the different sides, talking to different people is super, super important.
So what I'm hearing is I'm getting the notion that even with social media, you're being critical consumers. In other words, you're not passively, in reading, you'd say you're an active reader. You're taking information and critically thinking about it, right? So one of my questions is, where and how does your generation learn to think critically? And I mean that in all seriousness, because we know from cultural reproduction theory that children are brought up in their parents' homes where they learn the ideologies of their parents. They go to churches where they learn their parents' religion. They go to schools that often are microcosms of the society. And what I'm wondering is it college or is it something more that gets you to engage in thinking critically about not just the issues that are out there, but the things that you're taught by your parents, for instance, so that you don't necessarily vote like mom and dad?
I really think for me, it comes back to social media. You know, there's a lot of caveats to social media, and you do have to consume it critically. But I have greatly moved away from the views of my parents, and a lot of that perspective started with the resources I had of having my phone and being able to look stuff up online. You know, I would be influenced by people at my school, but then I would see more things online. I wouldn't necessarily take that at face value. I've always been very stubborn. So just listening to what my friends say didn't always sway my beliefs or opinions, but going online and being able to see so many different perspectives, even though sometimes we do talk about being in an echo chamber, it is also a great place to find new perspectives and learn information that you might not have had inside of where you live, where you grew up with religion in your phone.
Okay, so you guys heard that I'm from Alabama, and of course, all of you know that if hell freezes over, Alabama's still going to go Republican in this election. So you really hear a lot of that sort of side, and I'm not saying that it doesn't happen other places, you know, on a different side. But sort of this idea that, yeah, of course, internet really helps, you know, watching videos where you're challenged, like where you usually get challenged with facts, and, you know, at school where teachers will really challenge you and be like, why do you hold that opinion? Is it just something that your parents said to you? And so stuff like that, where I think it's really, really, really important to break out of that, where, you know, we're constantly in this rut, and you gotta look outside this spectrum that we're in.
I think for Gen Z, breaking out of that kind of hereditary belief definitely starts at school. At least for me, this is not my experience in America. This is from when I was back in Colombia. But there's one party or one candidate that the section of the community that I was part of tends to lean for. And I saw that in school. I saw that in my parents. But there was one point where I started meeting people from a different section of the community, to say so, who went to public university, or that is experienced at face value what the politics from this party was going through. And that really opened my eyes to the spectrum that is out there, that I didn't have to believe exactly what my parents believe. And this got reinforced for my one assignment that I had in high school, where we all had to write a paper about one of the presidential candidates, and I chose the candidate that wasn't the one that all my classmates were supporting, that my parents were supporting, and I looked into his policies, and that made me really realize, like, oh, then I think I believe something different from other people, and I can back it up. And that experience comes back now, I think, into my research and opinions.
And I feel that critical thinking, like my fellow panelists have said, really comes from so many different sources. And at least for me personally too, I've kind of seen the damage that not being aware of all these different sources can do to your mental health, can do to the way in which you view the world. I'm sure many of us have people that we know in our lives that very much only read one side or the other, don't really pay attention to different perspectives, and you know, it can be very damaging for how they view the world. I've got plenty of people in my life that I know that do that, and they are very pessimistic and don't kind of believe in the better parts of humanity, and that can be hard. It can be hard when we're constantly getting this bad news bias every 10 minutes. Like I said before, it's just something else is coming down the pipeline here. But I feel like that critical thinking comes from us observing other generations and even observing people within our generation too and seeing the harm that can come from that.
So for me, I have always been really interested in politics. My family comes from political background, and I've always been really interested in news sources. But I think for me, critical thinking also comes from social media because I can discuss it with people who don't even care about politics because they know something about politics because they read it on social media. So even they might have like a polarized opinion, but I'm always grateful that they have some opinion because then I can get my opinions challenged or challenge their opinions.
We talked about this in a meeting with some friends that Karl Popper, a philosopher, said many times, in order to have a conversation, there has to be a point of relativity. In other words, you and I can't have a debate if we can't agree on at least this is our reference point. If we're talking, otherwise we're talking like this, right? Have you guys experienced, or do you have a way of dealing with those people where your reference points are so fluid or not, or they seem non-existent? Like you're trying to have a discussion with a colleague and they won't even agree that 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, that kind of thing that we're seeing in this election. Have you dealt with that, and how do you deal with that with people online or in classrooms or your family even?
I think one of the most important parts of having a conversation is that you have to have, there's some universal truths that you just have to agree on. And if you don't, I feel like that's how we kind of wind up in what the political spectrum has kind of become, where it's like, we're just yelling at each other and it's like, I'm telling you this and you're like, that's not true. And I'm telling you this and it's like, that's not true. Like we can't have an engaged conversation like that. So, you know, I have run into that in my personal life with my parents, and it's like, it's to the point where I'm like, I'm not gonna talk to you about this, man. Like, some people, like you were saying, like, if your beliefs are hereditary or not, some people are born with those beliefs and they just never leave them behind. Like, some people you just can't get anywhere with. I think it just depends on who's open to the conversation. So.
I feel like people can be really polarized and not hear each other's opinion. And it can happen here in a second if we convert this discussion panel into a debate. So I feel like that is where discussion really helps, where you don't challenge someone directly, but just like hear them out and then tell them your opinion, and don't talk with the purpose to prove someone wrong, but to understand them and tell them, hey, I understand you, but this is something that I can do. Do you think we can have a common ground here? And so not debate, but discuss.
I had an experience actually on campus recently at Market Days. There were people from Turning Point USA, and they had a whiteboard that had written, do you believe biological men should be allowed to compete in women's sports? And they were trying to have what they called a conversation about this issue. I started by saying, okay, before, and as we've talked about, you know, in debate, you start by setting basic facts, yeah. And I said, before I can even talk to you about this, I have to say that scientifically, biological man is not a thing. It's biological male. And we can have that conversation, but that has to be defined first. Unfortunately, they were not able to agree to that as being fact. I pulled up World Health Organization's definition of gender. I talked about how I was a biology major, and you know, even within freshman high school level biology, there talks about a difference between gender and sex. They're two separate things. But we couldn't agree on that set of facts. She would not agree with me that gender and sex were different. I pulled up World Health Organization. She said that's controlled by governments. They're wrong, which is not true. And it's not a reliable source. So I said, okay, if as unbiased as the source as World Health Organization can't be trusted by you, we can't have a conversation because we don't agree on a set of facts. Now we're just arguing about whether a fact is true or not, and we're not talking about opinion.
Have you guys seen the Jubilee videos where they get them in a circle and then they just argue with each other. One with Dean, where he's like, can I talk? Can I talk? Can I talk? And then they just keep interrupting him. That's kind of the conversation that she had. I think watching those, it just feels like what debates feel like and what any political conversation in this election has felt like. Where it's like, guys, we're not actually talking. We're not talking with the intention of understanding. We're talking with the intention of hearing our own voice.
So one of the things I heard, and I'll preface this by saying that I was a political junkie like Will for many years, and some of the recent elections had turned me off of being a political junkie to the point where I avoid reading some of the news because it causes me anxiety. Does anyone here feel that sense of dread or anxiety from looking at the news? Because we're bombarded with it. It's in our phones. It dings on our phones. It's on our news. It's in the radio. How do you deal with the anxiety that comes with all that information, especially because you are so adept at social media?
So this is very personal for me because I'm a international student. I'm here on a student visa, and hopefully that won't be threatened. I say hopefully with a lot of quotes. But my parents are here on a visa that already had some problems, so to say, during COVID. So for me, this election, with all the talk about immigrants and how there's massive deportations, I'm very scared about my parents' side. So of course that gives me a lot of anxiety. But the way I deal with it is kind of looking at the other side of the political spectrum, so to say, and how there's still hope that a candidate may win that will take those approaches to immigration. It's not great way to calm your anxiety because of how contested this election is. I can't be like, oh yeah, they're never gonna win, that's never going to happen. But I think that's the best resource that I've got now.
I definitely feel that Gen Z certainly has a tendency to want to be so active on all the issues, and as someone who reads the news quite constantly, I'm kind of guilty as charged with that as well. But I feel like we should allow ourselves the opportunity to step back from the news, step back from, there's obviously these issues are very contentious, and this election has felt like it's been so incredibly long. And I feel like we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to step back and say, hey, obviously these issues are important, and not to be disengaged, but to kind of step back and kind of say to yourself that, politics is important, but it is not the end-all, be-all of our existence. Obviously, elections can change the nature of countries, but really those elections are influenced by people and by cultures. So I think those ultimately, at the end of the day, keep me more concerned is when we have culture shifts, when we have shifts in the discourse as well. But yeah, I'm going to be honest, it's really tough to tune out sometimes because you really don't want to.
I feel like, yeah, there's so much news, but I really feel excited and hopeful about it because now we're in this together. Because if there's something happening in one corner of the world, we are all together to help them. And I'm from India, and when something happens in India, I can know about it in seconds. And so if anything, it has just added more hope and excitement for me that I can help my people, even though I'm so far from them.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of when we're looking at all these news, and we kind of feel it's dread, but I think it comes from a source of, hey, we like to have agency in our own life. We like to think that we have a lot of control. And when you're really passionate about all these issues and bombarded with so much news all the time, about all these issues you're really passionate about, you gotta realize that you can do what you can in politics. You can go vote, you can advocate for your causes, but there's a certain limit that we can have on the effects of like the politics around us, the political sphere. And I think that you should just be careful not to have the weight of the world on your shoulders all the time.
Yeah, definitely. It can be a lot to take in. much of a political person. Like, I come from a news-off household. Like, unless there's a hurricane coming, the news will not be on. Like, I open New York Times to play Wordle, and I close it. But I just think now, moving into this new position, becoming an adult, this is the election that will determine the climate of my young adult life, and I have had to tune into some things a little bit. I feel like just constantly taking it all in your hand just get really overwhelming, but just knowing like the baseline issues, what you need to know to vote, the amendments, all of that, I feel like just making it selective is what's important.
I resonate a lot with one of the things that David said, that something that can calm that anxiety is like go out there and do what you can, but understanding that you can't do everything. So voting or being a volunteer for a candidate that holds the same views as you, voting in local elections, caring about what happens in the local level, which is where we have the most voice in. I think it's a great source to maybe like funnel that anxiety away.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming. Guys, the counseling center you can go for free. It's really great. Yeah, it's a lot.
Can faculty go?
Yeah. It's a lot. It's hard, and for me, what I care about, what I've always cared about the most when it comes to politics is human rights, and when I feel that those are being infringed upon. And that is really heavy. If economic policies here don't go the way you want them to go, it's not as heavy as, oh, my rights were just taken away. That's really great. Or seeing the conflict, or I should really say genocide, going on in Gaza, and having people from every side of the political spectrum, both candidates that we have under the two-party system, supporting Israel, and supporting the killing of innocent people, and watching that and feeling powerless, especially under the two-party system, to do anything about it, and not having the funding to donate to people. It's really difficult, and like I said, you do what you can, you take the steps you can, and that's really all you can do, and like David said, try not to have the weight of all on your shoulders.
So I have one more question before we open it up for others. That is, you mentioned it, we have a two-party system. Many of us in this room have heard, and we've heard it in our schools, our churches, everywhere else, America is the greatest political system in the world. How do you feel about that notion that we're the greatest country, we're also the greatest political system in the world? Do you think that that is true? Do you think that's untrue? Do you think there needs to be more nuance, etc.?
Short answer, no. Long answer. I believe that a country that calls itself the free world should take more into account the voices of more than just 7 states when choosing who's gonna lead them. So no, I don't think that the current system to pick our public officers is right or beneficial for most. And I feel like there are so many other ways to get even just a little bit more representation in politics that could be implemented, such as So I forgot the name of this, but at least in Colombia, this is how it works. Where, for example, in the Senate, proportional representation. That's the thing. So there are multiple parties, and then you can vote for the different parties, and each party gets a number of seats that is proportional to the votes that they got, and that way we can. And we also have a set number of seats for minorities, so that everyone's voice is heard. And the system in Colombia and proportional representation is far from being perfect, but I believe that it would give a voice to way more people than the system that we have.
Maybe I think greatness has become a charged word in the last few years here, but I feel that perhaps maybe political system is not the right word here, but maybe political experiment There's truly some very, as the political scientist junkie that I am, there's pretty innovative things that we have in the Constitution, and right, not perfect whatsoever by any means, but I think Winston Churchill said it best that, democracy is not perfect, but it's the best thing that we've got. So I feel that we, and maybe this is going to change or not change, but we've really created an environment where we can talk about these issues and experiment with them on all levels, whether we're looking at the local level, state, federal, whatever it would be. So though it is messy and not perfect and very contentious, I think that's kind of the nature of the game that we call democracy.
I also feel, circling back to your first question, what makes this election special? Maybe it's that America has been great, but now the question is, how do you uphold that greatness? And I feel like it is through giving everyone equal opportunity, because for me, what attracted me towards the US is I feel it's a hub for innovation and entrepreneurship, and so having those businesses, giving those businesses equal opportunities, I think that's really important to uphold that greatness.
Okay, so I think that you had said the two-party system and kind of how it can be great, or if it's great still. And I think that often it's sad. I was talking with my friend just last night about this, and kind of we get a binary, either red or blue, but then he said, my main problem why I can vote this year, a lot of people in Alabama don't vote because your vote is worth nothing, is there's no spectrum here. You get to pick one side or the other, but you don't actually get to pick up and down, whether you pick somebody who's authoritarian or libertarian, that the party kind of chooses for you. And sometimes we talk about the binary, but in Alabama, in my ballot, I have 24 elections going on, and out of that, 20 of them are uncontested. So I don't even have a binary there. I might be able to write in Nick Saban or something, but unfortunately, I think that that's not the right system to go for. It's very sad as somebody living in a place where one party dominates.
Yeah, definitely. I think for the last two solid elections, it's kind of moved away from, okay, these are your two options, to pick the least worst option out of these two. And it's not really, I feel like it's taken away some of the focus away from policy, what could make America the great thing it was promised to be. It's kind of just what will keep America from caving in on itself a little bit.
Okay, they're going to come up in just a few words. I want you to say, what makes you optimistic about our political experience?
Gen Z. Gen Z makes me very optimistic.
Great answer. Okay.
I think this panel discussion tonight, where we have student voices and we're all engaging with them together, it makes me hopeful that we keep doing it and we have more voices.
I think that the diversity of opinions and the strengthening of kind of my own ideas through higher education really strengthen my resolve and my opinion that everybody can do that everybody can have strengthening their ideas all the time.
I think the amount of people I know my age who are voting is really inspiring. It's a really great thing to see. There's often obstacles in the way of younger people voting, and yet a lot of young people are voting. Also, that I'm seeing, at least from the people around me, that people aren't always idealizing political candidates. That there's a difference between casting your vote for somebody and fully supporting and endorsing somebody, and that people are starting to be able to see that dichotomy, and that's not always black and white. That I've seen a lot of people saying, that support Kamala Harris. Hope you get in. You're going to have a lot of work to do and a lot to answer for once you are, and I think that's a great perspective, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Accessibility of information, because even though it can be sobering at times, knowledge is power. It's really all we can hope for right now is to just have that information in the right hands at the right time.
That communication is improving, empathy is on the rise, and young leaders know what they want and are taking the steps to achieve.
I will close by saying working with people your generation and you, some of my students, it gives me a lot of optimism. You'll hear, there's a song I like that says, every generation blames the one that comes before and after. Your generation is more politically astute, more informed than probably any generation of the past. And that gives me hope because I see in my students a focus on equity and a focus on justice. And I think that really speaks well for the future. So thank you all for that. And thank all of you guys for being here and being politically active.
I'd now like to pivot a little bit and open it up basically to the room. And so for just about 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, finish filling out that note card that you were given, and then I want you to just talk with the people that are near you, okay? So think about what do you dread, what do you hope for, and do y'all have similar questions? And then wait, before you do, hold on, I'm gonna give you direction. And then after y'all have engaged with each other for a little bit, Dr. Kaplan and General Triumph are going to be on the lookout for who wants to share that question with the panel, and then we'll do that.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you for chatting with one another, sharing your hopes and dreams, your fears, all of the above. We're going to bring it back for a minute. And then if you've got a question, quiet down, quiet down. Clap if you can hear me. All right. If you've got a question that you'd like to throw to the panel, just keep your hand up, and Dr. Kaplan or General Time will find you, and then we'll see how many of these things we can get to before we go to breakout. So here we go.
Hello guys, my name is Shipton. So one of the questions that you guys were asked was like, is our democracy, I guess, perfect in the means of how we elect a president? And I just wanted to know, like, you guys kind of had a difference of opinion. What is your guys' perspective on the Electoral College as a means for electing the president? And what are your guys' thoughts as a two-party system? Because I know you mentioned, like, with Colombia, how I guess they have more than a two-party system. So I guess what are your guys' perspective or thoughts on that idea?
Thank you, that's a great question. We definitely talk about this a lot as UNF students in our conversations. At least for me, I don't think the Electoral College serves the purpose that, it was originally put in place because news couldn't get to everybody. So that we made sure that there was an educated elector. But even that perspective from back when we started our country is very classist and biased. And I think when it's supposed to be a democratic election and there's a chance that the person who wins the popular vote doesn't win the presidency, if that's occurring, then it's not a democratic election the way it should be. So I believe in the abolition of the Electoral College, and I also believe that the two-party system serves a similar purpose where it prevents us from really expressing our voices.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Electoral College, which, the whole point was to give smaller states power, it's just led to a system where if you're not a battleground state, people are like, man, it doesn't matter my vote. Like in Alabama, which is just always leaning red. Like in New York, which is mostly leaning blue. Like it doesn't really empower the individual voter. Like unless you're in Pennsylvania this election, what are you really doing?
I mean, not to get into the policy weeds here on this. It is a good question, I appreciate it. I think just feasibility-wise, we're not going to throw the whole entire Electoral College in the trash can just overnight or kind of in our current political climate. But I don't think that necessarily doesn't mean we can't make tweaks to it. We can't kind of have state-level kind of adjustments to how votes are counted. And, we've seen that with Nebraska and Maine. They have their proportional representation, things like that. So I think that it's not all doom and gloom at the end of the day with the Electoral College. There still are opportunities for young people to say, hey, state legislature, we need to make this tweak, and that'll make it even more fair.
Hi, my name is Joey. I kind of wanted to step back towards the end of this discussion after we started talking about critical thinking and kind of the approach to that. I know in Social Society, as a part of our class, we have really long definitions of quite comprehensive of critical thinking.
Can you speak up a little bit? We're having trouble getting you up here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's all. And so I just wanted to ask, like, what's your definition of critical thinking? How does that factor into being able to analyze and synthesize your perspective, opinions, or beliefs?
So I'd love to answer this. I think that if you talk to me, you know that I really like to doubt myself, which is really hard for a lot of people. That critically thinking is really thinking that you could be wrong on any issue, that you can't be 100% sure of anything, and that I am wrong on plenty of things, that we're all inherently flawed, that there just is problems that need to be solved both internally and externally, and that I need to put effort towards thinking about my own biases and those of others.
For critical thinking, I have a really good example. If you come to ULP campus, there are so many demonstrations going on, and sometimes they're so upsetting for students. But the students don't go and like interrupt them or like make their voices so loud that they can't speak. But what they would do is go on the side and have another demonstration which is expressing their view. And so you can see that on campus there are two views that are living. And that view can be different than yours, but they're still existing. And so I feel like that acceptance is what is critical thinking, where you're letting the views challenge and you're letting the opposite views live.
So I'm currently taking a class that made me memorize the definition of critical thinking, and I think I resonate a lot with that now as I come to understand it as the habit to actually look at all the factors within a situation, like all the perspective, all the events, all the facts, before forming an opinion or a conclusion. So I think that critical thinking is more like not taking something and actually accepting it, but is scrutinizing and judging it before forming your own opinion about it.
I'm gonna take a different perspective to this. I'm a creative writing minor. We say that every poem has two meanings. So if your poem only has one meaning, you don't have a proper poem. So I would say critical thinking is when you bypass that first meaning and you look for that second meaning.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm James, and my question is if you have any opinions on the lingering effects of McCarthyism and how it affects our inability to create anything other than a two-party system.
Can you repeat that, please?
So it's, do I need to define McCarthyism? So McCarthyism is a political ideology that was touted by Senator, I believe, Joe McCarthy, who was an active anti-communist lobbyist who promoted a lot of the anti-communist and anti-socialist propaganda that permeated the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And my question is if you think lingering effects of McCarthyism and this anti-communist attitude has inhibited our ability to do something other than a two-party system.
I agree that there may be some effects that affect our two-party system today because specifically one of the parties has associated everything that goes against that party as communism, and since capitalism has become so homogenous with America's identity, it definitely reflects why if you are part of this party, you're like anti-America. So I agree that there are a lot, even though we think that we've moved past that, and this happens with many issues, there are still like ripple effects that affect our political thinking today.
I think that the effects of McCarthyism definitely can be seen today, in the sense that I think that there's a significant amount of pressure to undermine the foundation of our democracy by attacking the two. Obviously, we live in a binary, so they're attacking each other, undermining the foundations. We got the, we talked about it earlier. We're the undermining that we're voting to safeguard our democracy, no matter which side you're on. You really think that this election is, live or die, And so I think that's, kind of that result of kind of losing the meaning through the process. McCarthyism was just, blindly going after people and like losing the train of thought within the process of just hunting people down.
First, thank you for the definition. I appreciate that before I speak on something. I can't, because I'm not super knowledgeable in that area, say whether that directly affected this, but I do think we see similar things in the current political sphere. We have candidates being called sad cat ladies. We have people pointing fingers, and I think oh, you were bad, you were immoral for this reason. It really just takes away from the actual policy, and I think that was kind of the idea behind McCarthyism, is just to stop people that you don't like by doing something that has nothing to do with what they've actually done, and just make them become this immoral character and ruin their reputation. And I think pointing to people like that, trying to make them an immoral character, is something that we still see today to distract from actual policy.
Just wanted to bring out an example, not to go so far, during the presidential debate, Trump called Kamala comments as if it was an offense. So I think that shows perfectly how he still has a sense to it.
Yeah, I think as long as the Republican Party tries to brand itself kind of synonymously with being an American, moving away from that two-party system isn't really a plausible option without like an entire political uprising.
How important do you think the presidential election is versus your own state and local elections?
I think that's an excellent question. Obviously, all elections are important. You know, it's a true expression of our democracy. But I think practically speaking, when you're trying to interact with candidates, understanding issues, really, and the influence that kind of national politics versus local politics, we can kind of say with some definitive answer that local politics just have more importance on you, just because they're just closer, you know, just kind of practically speaking in our political system. That's not to say that national politics is unimportant, but I think we don't give local politics the kind of respect and kind of nuance that it deserves in this country. You know, these aren't really sexy topics that we talk about at the local level. If we're trying to decide how much the trash fee is going to be, if we're going to decide where we're going to put a building, things like that, I mean, these things at face value can seem pretty boring, but, you know, just looking at the research, we know that they're very important because they affect people in their daily lives, kind of at that micro level. So at least in my view, local politics, in terms of impact, trumps national politics. And I think that's something that we've kind of lost in this country too, that we feel like the national and the local is all kind of the same when it doesn't necessarily have to be. You know, a lot of local politicians in my area are Democrats, and you know, they don't behave in the same way that they do at the national level, and I think that's okay. I mean, we can't expect our politicians to behave in all the same way at all the same levels, because you know, my hometown of Tucson is a lot different than places like Washington, D.C. and other states as well. So I think we need to keep that nuance alive.
I think that's a really great point, and but also for people like who moved out of their hometowns for college, I think national politics is really important because based on that they can pose their mail because you cannot go home always, and so I feel like that leadership that's central to all the local politicians, I think that is the guiding force for people who are away from home.
You know, obviously, it kind of depends on which state you're in. As far as I know that the question is our national elections more important than local elections or vice versa. But I think that we can kind of break this down a little bit and say that if you live in one of the 6, swing states, your vote on the national elections really matters. Whereas in Alabama, I have like an outsized impact on my local elections. That for the 3 local elections that I actually get a choice in, that I have an outsized effect on those. And I think that's greatly important. That's why I don't switch my residency here. That's why I still vote in Alabama, even though my vote for president will never matter. My $1.44 I had to pay for postage to send that back to Alabama is probably more than my vote is worth.
I totally agree that the local elections are extremely important and should be forgotten. I do want to put one point out that sometimes at the local, especially Florida level, I don't really feel represented or heard, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion being removed from Florida schools, or at least the funding from public Florida schools. Policies like that, just as one example, are things that make me feel not very heard by the state and at the local, more local level, I guess. State isn't fully local. But, so sometimes I feel like the federal elections are kind of the only chance I get to be represented if the local people who are being elected just don't align with my values.
Yeah, I didn't know the governor actually did anything until Ron DeSantis. And I didn't really know until voting in this election that we have like amendments on our ballot. Like Amendment 3 and Amendment 4, guys. Oh my gosh. Like that, I feel like the effects of voting at the local level are just a lot more tangible. Like, these are our laws. Like, someone could.
I agree with what Rose has said about how elections at a local level are definitely a more important occasion where our voices can be heard, especially in states that don't swing. Because as David was saying, even though his vote will maybe not matter in the presidential election, you can actually contribute to what's directly affecting you, such as the DEI laws. And that's and even this diminishing the effects that the electoral college have by maybe implementing more proportional representation at the state level. So yeah, I think that they're very important, even though I can't vote.
Hi, all. My question is actually going back to DEI. When Joe Biden ran for president, he picked Kamala Harris because, quote unquote, she is a black woman. I want a black woman to be my running mate. And then now that she's on the platform she is, as a black woman, it's really seen as a DEI reasoning, and a big reason why a lot of people want to vote for her is because she's black and she's a woman. My question is that why is that in society now we're focusing so much more on what she looks like rather than the values she holds? And I also see that in what we're doing when you talk about the Senate and whatnot. Why should we go to people who just look a certain way instead of what their values truly are and match our values?
Okay, I think that was a great question. The simplest way I can explain this is you can't advocate for someone or it's difficult to emphasize with someone the experiences that they've been through if you haven't been through similar experiences. Some politicians have empathy, regardless of race. Some do not. So it's in the best interest of certain demographics to be represented racially or ethnically in politics, especially in a way that hasn't historically happened.
So going back to my example of how Senate seats work in Colombia, for example, 2 seats automatically go to indigenous populations and indigenous leaders. And as Ali was mentioning, sadly, in the society we live in today, we experience different things depending on how we look. So if we want for that people to ever be heard and ever be represented, we have to choose someone who has gone through similar experiences as them.
And I'd also like to say, I wouldn't necessarily say that everyone who is black is voting for Kamala because she's black. I'm black. You guys can see that. I would be voting for her if she's back in the West. I truly think that if there was a candidate who I better thought would represent our country and they didn't happen to be black, I wouldn't necessarily let that be my deciding vote. I think it really depends on what your issues are as a voter, because some voters vote based on candidate likability. Some voters are single issue voters, so they're voting just about the Gaza conflict, or they're voting just about abortion at the forefront of their minds. So I think it really depends on the individual voter.
I think just to chime in too, I don't think it's anything new, personally speaking. I know, like JFK, there was concerns about him being Catholic back in the 60s when he was running, and, his campaign had to navigate those types of conversations. So I really don't think it's anything new, and, some people don't care for those types of demographic considerations to be part of politics, and there's something to be said about that. But I also think there's something to be said about it too being part of the conversation. But I just wanted to chime in and say that I don't think it's anything to do.
I also want to say I can't speak for anyone else, but for myself personally, why I think representation matters is because race is one thing, another thing is gender. Why do we care if we have a female president or a male president? But I feel like it comes down to representation, and for me, seeing more women representative matters, and I feel like it comes down to what people want and what they care about.
I will say, I think the campaign itself hasn't really, as much as maybe voters have, emphasized that idea. Kamala Harris, when asked in interviews, kind of steps around it and tries not to make that the focus. So I think that's something that's important to consider. I also think, we discussed at the beginning, the point of this whole discourse series that you guys do is to get diverse voices. And we, at least in this group, believe that that's very important. That's why we're part of this. And for all of America, we've had a very similar person be president. We've had a man every time. We've only had one black president. Getting diverse voices, to me, is very important. Like you said, people grow up in different circumstances based on what they look like. It's not something that can be separated from a person, and it is something that affects how people grow up, what their perspectives are, what they know, gives them empathy for people. So I think it is an important consideration for people to make, and I do, again, think it's important to say that the campaign itself has not emphasized that as much as maybe we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Raza here on the campaign itself. She stepped around it in interviews, trying to really focus on, policies and stuff important to her and kind of like the general movement of like the collection of these identities. But I think that we kind of ignored that the outside, voice speaking on this is, Donald Trump speaking on her identity and, really pushing that and putting that into the public sphere and, really making people think about that. And I think that, if you really don't like identity politics, you really wouldn't like Donald Trump speaking on her identity as much as he does. And that's like one movement that I have.
Do we have time for just one more question, and then we're gonna let you go? Hi, I'm Sammy. So my question is, how do you guys feel about the mix of politics and pop culture? For example, we have Kamala Harris on the Call Her Daddy podcast, and Donald Trump making TikToks with Jake Paul. So a lot of people claim that it's simply a smart campaign strategy, and others say it's disturbingly dystopian. I was just wanting your guys' point of view.
Yeah, so basically, as we've been meeting over these last few months, we kind of start our meetings by saying, like, what have you read, what have you researched, what have you done? And the first thing that usually comes out of my mouth is, I've been on Twitter, right? I just think, summer guys, you really can't, some of it is just a really clever way to appeal to our demographic. Gen Z is online, we're streaming, all of that. But you really can't separate, at this point, internet culture from online culture. So the policies just have to be what the people are.
I think to chime in on that too, once again, not anything new. We've seen that in the past and other elections as well. I think it definitely takes a different form now. Making TikToks with former Disney stars is probably a new one. But I don't think it's not dystopian. It's just kind of part of what celebrities and politicians have always done. Is and that we use that as a heuristic shortcut too. Of Taylor Swift told me who to vote for, and I appreciate her insights on other matters. So I personally would hope that you would, and I know for a fact that a lot of people will not just vote for someone just because a celebrity told them to do so. But I definitely think it's been a part of our culture, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. We do it with other things too. If Katy Perry tells me to go buy something and I like her music, then a lot of people will do that. So it's not out of the ordinary thing.
I think the relationship between politics and also with something that we've been talking about, which is the sportification of politics and how we don't see them as something that affects our lives anymore, but we've seen it like a third person role. And we see them as like a football match, who's going to win, or as a reality show. And I think that switching perspective with politics that has stemmed from the two-party system and the classification of politics, which means how there's just like some part of the population which will always be blue, and some part of the population which will always be red. And the confrontation between those two groups, I think that has a lot to do with like how we see politics and how it has mixed with pop culture.
I also feel like celebrities, they don't carry just one identity. For me, when Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala Harris, I was really happy, but it wasn't part of me that liked Taylor Swift's music. It was part of me that really liked Taylor Swift's independence and boldness. And when she endorsed her, I felt really happy because I see that in Kamala Harris, I see that in Taylor Swift, and those are my values. So I think it's the values aligning and those identities aligning.
All right, thank you so much for spending your evening with us on election night. I'm going to let Ted Booth say a couple words before we let our panelists go, and before I give you a quick update on your breakouts.
I don't even have a couple of words. I have one quick thing to say. We do these every month. We've done a whole lot of panels with a whole lot of audiences. I do have to say, hands down, these are the best questions we've ever gotten from any audience that we've ever had. So give I mean, McCarthy is like shit. I mean, wow, that's
All right. Well, let me ask for one more round of applause for our panelists. I'm just going to give you a quick summation of what you're going to do in your breakouts today for NIM and for those students that are joining them today for the breakouts. Put that up on the board here. So I used to teach a class for colloquium called Model US. That's where I got to know some of the lovely people in this room. And in that particular class, the goal was to basically treat politics quite literally as a game. Not to necessarily reduce it to a sport, the way that Val was just talking about, but in order to put yourself in that role-playing position of considering, if I were in charge, what would I do? And that's basically what you're going to do in your breakouts today. So we're doubling up the rooms so that you'll have larger sections than typically, and we're putting it into little committees, okay? You don't need to be a policy expert. You don't need to worry about knowing the difference between different congressional procedures. Let me just give you a quick rundown. But what you're going to do is you're going to go into your room with your facilitators who can walk you through a lot of these steps. But basically, you're going to divide into committees that are very generally titled, okay, based on different kinds of issues, maybe foreign policy, maybe economic issues, maybe cultural issues. And then you're going to talk with a small group of people about what do we think is the biggest problem and what do we want to do about it. Okay? And your goal in that committee is going to basically be to create a resolution. And that resolution is going to be something very simple. If you want to do some Googling real quick to find some support, that's great. But ultimately, the goal is to address a particular issue that you think is a challenge to the country, and then come up with something that you think is going to resolve that issue, okay? Hence, which is why it's a resolution. But once you do that, you're going to you're going to talk about it in your room as a large group, and then prioritize what do y'all, as Gen Z, think is the top priority? What's the most important of these resolutions you've come up with? And then you're going to share them on a Google Doc and be able to look at what all the other rooms said too, and ultimately vote on them, and then we'll announce the winners later. So, with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Kaplan. Thank you so much again for spending this evening with us.
So you're now in regular breakout rooms. Film 1 and Film 2, Building 2, 2216, GIS 1 and Soccer 1, 511102, GIS 2 and Soccer 2, 511103, Mentors and Philanthropy,
511104, water leaks.
So for the videos, I'll try to get them to you sometime this week.
Great, thank you. That'd be awesome. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Not it. What do we do?